Hi everyone, this is Module 12, a lecture on global inequality that accompanies the reading Introduction to Sociology, Chapter 9, pages 229 to 253. This is Part 1. So some basic concepts we're going to cover is the understanding of the systematic differences in wealth and power among countries. We'll also talk about different economic standards of living that people have throughout the world. We'll also consider various theories that will explain why some societies are wealthier than others, and also how global inequality can be overcome. That will be in part 2 of the lecture. We'll also talk about how globalization might shape global inequality in the future. So, what is globalization? We can define it as the increased economic, political, and social interconnectedness of the world. Think about this in this way. We are dependent on other nations, for example, on China, where a lot of our goods are manufactured. On the other hand, other countries are dependent on us for technological and, let's say, financial services. So, what is global inequality? It's the systematic difference in wealth and power between countries. We can divide countries the way that is similar to how we divided class in last chapter. We have high income, middle income, and low income countries. However, it's important to keep in mind that this division reflects economic disparity only and does not mean that certain countries are lacking in terms of history or culture. We can divide countries, like I said, in terms of income. So we look at this globally through the per person gross national income, usually known as the GNI. So we have 70 high income countries, 108 middle income countries, and we can divide middle income countries into upper middle class and upper middle income countries and lower middle income countries. And we also have 36 low income countries. Here's a little map that shows rich and poor countries in the world by income. And you can see that the very bright orange, that's high income countries, and then the blue are often very low income countries. So you can see the green as in lower middle countries, and the yellow color is upper middle income countries. Here's a little also graph on global inequality, how different quality of life is in these countries. So you can see how much we spend per person on this, what's the population, and also the annual population growth, meaning how many kids are being born. Okay, so when we talk about high income countries, we're talking about highly industrialized countries. They were the first to industrialize. They were the nations where the industrialization process started. So they are home to 14.2% of the world population. But look at this. They take home about 66% of the world's total income. So that's a huge, huge amount of money. We're talking about countries of Western Europe, Great Britain, France, Germany, as well as US and Canada. Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan, these are countries that industrialized more recently, also fall into this group because they had such a growth and they're doing so well, so they're considered high income nations. When we talk about middle income nations, this is a very diverse group. Remember, it's 108 countries, so there's going to be huge differences between them. They're at different levels of industrialization. However, altogether, they're home to almost 72% of the world population. But look at this, they only take 31% of the world's total income. Where can we find middle income countries? We're talking in East and Southeast Asia, but also rich countries of the Middle East and North Africa, countries in the Americas such as Mexico, Central America, Cuba, other countries in the Caribbean and South America, and the once communist republics that formerly made up the Soviet Union and East European allies. Poland is a good example. And then low income countries. Again, this is a diverse group, but what's so different about them is that they're mostly still agricultural, and at least they're in early phases of industrialization. They're home to about 12% of the world's population, but they take home only 7% of the world's total income. They also have high population growth, meaning that the population is growing at a very fast rate, right? A lot of kids are being born in these nations. We're talking about Eastern, Western, and Sub-Saharan Africa, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, and few other Eastern Asian nations. India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and South Asia, Eastern and Central European countries such as Georgia and Ukraine, and Haiti and Nicaragua also fall into this category. Um, so we can talk about this growing global inequality, and the fact is that the rich get richer and poor get poorer. So during the last 40 years, the overall standard of living in the world has slowly risen. However, many of these gains have been made in high and middle income countries, where living standards in many of the poorest countries have actually declined. In 2006, I know this is almost, 10 years ago, 9 years ago, the average person in a typical high-income country earned 56 times as much as his or her counterpart in low-income country. Remember, this is 2006. It might be that this number is much higher now. And the sad thing is that about the half of world's population, although majority of them will live, in these lower income and lower middle income and low income countries, but that's an enormous amount of world's population. Most of them, I'm sorry, 50% of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day. For us here in a Western nation, is actually very hard to imagine what it means to live on less than $2 a day. So these numbers might seem very abstract. So what does it mean in terms of actual living standards? So in terms of health, we see huge differences in access to and quality of health care facilities. So those living in high-income countries have better access to hospitals, clinics, pharmacies, and other healthcare facilities. And overall, they have better healthcare. Think about it here. We have many hospitals in different boroughs, right? We have clinics in every borough. So the other thing is we see differences in overall cleanliness. And what I mean by that, we see differences in access to water, sanitation, and the quality of soil and air. Overall, high-income nations are cleaner. Drinking water is not polluted. There are proper sanitation services, garbage collection management systems, sewage systems that separate water from water supplies, and have cleaner air and soil. That is not the case in a lot of low-income nations. We take for granted that when we open our faucets at home, clean water falls out. But of course, a lot of, especially probably about 50% of the world's population, those living on $2 or less a day, do not have these kind of facilities, do not have access to clean water. And because of that, we see infectious diseases, and these rates of infectious diseases differ whether you live in high or low income country. High income nations, obviously, because of access to this clean water, have lower rates of infectious diseases since their healthcare is better, and diseases tend to be caught in earlier, more treatable stages. The same disease that can cure here might kill somebody who lives in low income nation because they don't have access to clean water. In terms of hunger, malnutrition, and famine, famine means extreme food scarcity. So, although these three things have always been global sources of poor health, their extent to which they appear now is newer. About 854 million people go hungry every day. 96% of them live in developing countries, low-income countries. About a quarter of the world's hungry are kids under 5. We're talking about 147 million. Each year, over half of the deaths of children under the age of 5 results from hunger. And hunger is defined as a diet of 1,800 calories or less, the amount insufficient to provide adults with the nutrients required for healthy, active lives. Every 5 seconds, a child dies because he or she is hungry. More than 3/4 of all malnourished kids under the age of 5 live in countries that actually produce a food surplus. Think about how much food is being wasted here in the Western world. Most famine, again, this extreme food scarcity, is a result of combination of natural and social forces, meaning that natural forces, we're talking about droughts, floods, and earthquakes. Social forces include warfare, economic policies, and the spread of diseases such as HIV and AIDS. And then education and literacy. Lower income countries are disadvantaged because they can seldom afford high quality public education systems. They might not have schools or teachers to have in these schools. Secondary school attendance, meaning up to and including high school, is nearly 100% in high income countries, but only 78% in middle income and 43% in low income countries. Think about this. We take education, primary education, as free for granted. That is not the case in many of these nations. Um, if you think about it, quality and years of education affect economic development because education contributes to economic growth because people with advanced schooling become the skilled workers necessary for high wage industries. Economic Educated people are also more able to escape poverty because they can get higher paying jobs. And educated people have fewer kids, which makes it easier for them to feed, clothe, and provide shelter for their families. Okay, this is end of part one. I'll meet you in part two.